I first came into science, I was a bit apprehensive about sort of sharing it with my peers and things like that, sharing who I was and my rare disease and how it relates to the research that I was doing. So I was sort of more focused when I first started on just being a scientist. But when we got the diagnosis, I started to learn a bit more about, the different treatments that I should be focusing on. It does get easy to sort of forget that I am still a scientist. So having people in the lab like Ben and a lot of my PhD mates that always look at me as a scientist and ask me scientist questions, we have very intense technical discussions, that sort of thing helps me remember that I'm a scientist as much as a patient. My name is Ryan Brown and I'm a PhD student at Peter Mac.
My name's Ben Hogan. I'm the Associate Director for Laboratory Research at Peter Mac and Head of the Vascular Biology Laboratory at Peter Mac Research. I actually first met Ryan's mum on the phone. She had 3 boys with Hennekam syndrome and she was trying to see cancers and what it meant for her boys growing up in particular. So she contacted me back in about 2011, I believe. She contacted me because in 2009, had made a discovery of the gene that's involved in Hennekam syndrome, CCBE1. And a few years later, Rhino was on his way to the University of Queensland to look at moving from Bundaberg down to UQ for his undergraduate degree. And so I think he must have been about 17 years old, maybe 16 years old. And he came and chatted to me about Hennekam syndrome and my research. And that was probably the first time I'd ever had a patient in my office, but not just a patient, but also a budding scientist with interest in Hennekam syndrome, lymphatics and disease research.
To start off with, we didn't really think anything was wrong. We just thought we were a little bit different, but Mum always knew that something was wrong, and she knew, like when we would get puffy or swollen, she knew that was, there's something going on there, and all these symptoms that we were having were actually all connected. They weren't just things that made us a little bit different from the other kids at school. Mum struggled a lot trying to get the answers, trying to even figure out the right questions to be asking. So, the doctors would be speaking in almost a different language. So that was definitely hard for Mum, trying to figure out the right answers from all the things that they were saying, and especially try and find the right questions to be asking them as well. I always grew up wanting to go into the science side of things. I first wanted to go into medicine, but it didn't quite work out. Then after that, that's when I met Ben and saw the work that he does and all the work that other people do at the IMB. And that's sort of when I knew I want to stay on this track.
I've been using zebrafish for about 23 years, since I was a PhD student. And we use the zebrafish for biomedical research for a number of reasons. Primarily because the fish is a really powerful model of human disease, and it's a model that allows us to do genetic studies and also imaging studies of how tissues form and how they function. In about 2006, I was lucky enough as a junior scientist to become a postdoc in the Hubrecht Institute in the Netherlands, and I worked in a famous laboratory there, the Schulte-Merkel laboratory, where for the first time we did a very large-scale genetic discovery screen to look for genes that were required for the formation of lymphatic vessels but not blood vessels. And in that screen, we didn't know it at the time, but we had just discovered a major disease-causing gene in humans. Ultimately, we found with clinicians there in Amsterdam in 2009 that this particular gene is mutated in Hennekam syndrome. And several years later, I met Ryan and we worked with Genetic Health Queensland and other genomic researchers in Queensland, and we found that mutations in this particular CCBE1 gene were underlying lymphedema in Ryan's family and his brothers.
What excites me most about the research that I'm doing now is it's, I guess, quite personal. Obviously, I'm quite connected to the idea of trying to grow new lymphatics or trying to fix lymphatics that don't work. So I think that's definitely one of the things that excites me the most. The discoveries that you make can apply to a broad range of things. And that means for cancer patients at the moment that are suffering from lymphedema, understanding a simple question such as how can we make vessels regrow means that you're going to be able to treat these patients if they, when they have lymphedema, treat those symptoms by fixing the actual problem. But it also means that you're going to be able to apply this to people with rare diseases that don't have proper lymphatic function as well. So I think just the general versatility of science and what we do means that anything that we're doing here is going to be huge impact on cancer patients themselves.
I think it is pretty remarkable, actually. I think day to day, honestly, we focus on the science and we're focused on the question of how can we get lymphatic vessels to grow in a tissue. But when you sort of catch yourself and stop and think about the whole journey, I think it's a pretty remarkable to have someone who has a rare disease, who really understands what it means for patients, to the idea that one day we might be able to, come up with a solution in the lab for the, I guess, the things that they had to live with growing up. And I think it's remarkable to have also been able to play a role as a mentor for Ryan as a scientist, to watch him grow as a scientist and mature in the way he goes about his work as well. So yeah, I feel pretty lucky to have been part of that story, actually.
All of us get frustrated about our research, especially when it isn't going the way we want. Like, a lot of people will tell you, if you don't get the answers that you want, that's more exciting. Sometimes it's true, but there's a lot of invested time and energy that goes into some of the things that we do. When that comes to me personally, I think, I just think about that time on it. My PhD isn't going to go forever and this project won't go forever. So I definitely choke up a little bit thinking about that, thinking that whatever I find here, whenever I'm in the lab, I have to make the best possible use, because I'm not going to be here for too much longer. I need to figure it out. So I think that sort of comes in a bit of frustration. And the other thing is that it's quite a unique perspective having a patient scientist. So I feel like, all the stars are aligning for this, and I'm that last little star that has to sort of do what it needs to do, and there's a lot of pressure behind that as well. But I have a lot of support from my friends and my family, so it really helps dull that. The big hope for this sort of research that I'm doing, even long after I'm finished in science, would be to have such an understanding on rare diseases and how they occur during development, that we would be able to see a patient that comes in with a rare disease or even an inherited disease and understand exactly what's gone wrong and exactly how we can address that from a therapeutic perspective as well. I think that would be something really awesome that we could work towards. Throughout my journey, having people like Ben has been a certain privilege, people that understand where I've sort of come from and my disease and how it affects me and why it is driving me to become a scientist. It's been an absolute privilege having those people along for that journey, helping me go. But thinking back to the amount of work that I had to put in to get where I am, I suppose, in conjunction with that, definitely makes me proud of my own journey as well as my relationships and the network that I've sort of created along the way.